I was 9 years old the first time I saw him. He was already wearing that navy blue uniform, though back then it looked oversized on his young shoulders. It was his first year as a cadet in the police academy, and to me he looked like the bravest man alive. His name was Ethan. I remember standing at the corner of our street, holding my mother's hand as she chatted with a neighbor. Ethan passed by, tall and serious, his steps heavy as though he carried a whole world on his back. He smiled at us, just a polite smile, but my little heart exploded with something I didn't yet have a name for. It wasn't just a crush. It was the kind of instant devotion that children are capable of, pure, total, unquestioning. I thought, one day, I will marry him. Years passed, but that thought never left me. By the time I was a teenager, I understood more about Ethan's life. He wasn't like other men. While my classmates dreamed about traveling, concerts, or fancy jobs, Ethan had one dream only: to rise through the ranks of the police force, to earn stars on his shoulders, to protect the city. He lived for discipline. He trained when others rested, studied laws and procedures when others partied. Some people called him obsessed, but to me, it was noble. I admired his dedication more than anything. I would see him sometimes in the evenings when he returned from long shifts. His uniform slightly wrinkled, his eyes tired, yet his posture still proud. He always greeted my parents politely. Sometimes he would ask me about school, especially when he learned I was good at mathematics. "Math, huh?" he said once, with that half-smile that never reached his eyes. "The world could use more logical minds. Maybe you'll become a detective one day." I laughed nervously, clutching my school books, my cheeks burning. If only he knew how those words branded themselves into my heart. I became a teacher. A simple choice, a safe one. Teaching children gave me a sense of stability, and numbers had always been my comfort. I told myself it was enough. But Ethan remained in my heart. He never really saw me, not the way I saw him. To him, I was the girl next door, the quiet one with chalk-stained hands and soft smiles. To me, he was everything. Whenever I heard sirens in the distance, my chest tightened. Was it him? Was he safe? I followed his career from the edges of the crowd. Promotions, awards, mentions in the local newspaper. Every step he climbed, I celebrated silently, like his shadow cheering from behind. Sometimes I wondered if I was foolish, loving someone who belonged more to his duty than to any woman. But my heart didn't care. It beat for him, in silence, faithfully. There were rare moments when I felt the universe teasing me with possibility. Once, at a neighborhood gathering, I stood across the yard, holding a cup of tea, when Ethan approached. His uniform was gone, replaced by a casual shirt that made him seem younger, almost vulnerable. "Anna," he said, my name soft in his deep voice. "Still teaching?" "Yes," I answered, smiling too quickly. He nodded. "That's good. Kids need teachers who care. You've always had that look, patient, steady. Not many people can do what you do." It was a simple compliment, but it felt like a declaration. My chest ached with hope. For a brief second, I thought maybe one day he would see me the way I saw him. Years moved like seasons, predictable but unremarkable. I watched Ethan's name rise within the police department, appearing in the local papers more often. Words like dedicated, relentless, unstoppable clung to him the way shadows cling to light. I, too, had my headlines, only in the fragile notebooks of my students. Little drawings of hearts around my name, messy equations scribbled with triumph, the wide smiles of children who finally solved a problem. It was a quieter legacy. But whenever I saw Ethan's photograph in uniform, medals gleaming, eyes sharp and resolute, I couldn't help but think, that's the man I've loved all my life. And he doesn't even know it. Every awards ceremony, every mention on TV, I watched. Sometimes from the back of the crowd, other times alone in my apartment, with the volume low and my heart racing. He was larger than life, while I stayed small. One autumn evening, I saw him again in passing. He was walking home after a late shift, his shoulders stiff with fatigue, yet he stopped when he recognized me. "Still burning the midnight oil with lesson plans?" he asked, glancing at the papers I carried. I smiled. And you? Still saving the city single-handedly. He chuckled, the sound brief, like he didn't often allow himself such luxuries. Not single-handedly, but I try. We stood in silence for a moment. The streetlight flickered above us, the world eerily quiet. I wanted to say everything. I've loved you since I was 9. I worry about you every night. I would trade my entire safe little world just to be seen by you. But all I managed was, you should rest more. He looked at me then, his gaze softer than I had ever seen. Maybe one day. That maybe lived in me for years. I tried to live a normal life. Friends encouraged me to date, to move on, as though love could be redirected like traffic. I went on a few dinners with kind men, listened politely as they spoke about sports, careers, weekend trips. But every time I tried to imagine a future, Ethan's shadow blocked the light. It wasn't fair, to them or to me. Yet my heart belonged to him, whether he asked for it or not. Sometimes, at night, I would sit by my window watching the street. If a police car passed, I whispered a prayer under my breath. Keep him safe. Please just keep him safe. That was my love story. One-sided, silent, yet endless. There was one night, just one, when I thought everything might change. It was during a storm. I was locking up my classroom when Ethan appeared at the door, soaked to the bone. His eyes were frantic, as though searching for something he couldn't name. Anna, he said, his voice hoarse. I needed a quiet place for a moment. I let him in without a word. We sat in silence, the thunder echoing outside. He leaned back against the desk, his hands trembling slightly. It gets heavy sometimes, he admitted, staring at the rain. This job, it takes everything. And some days, I wonder if it's worth it. My chest tightened. He was opening a door I had never dared to touch. I wanted to step inside, to tell him he wasn't alone, that my love could carry the weight he bore. Instead, I whispered, "You're not made of stone, Ethan. It's okay to feel it." He turned to me, and for one fleeting second, I thought he might close the distance between us. But then the storm quieted, and with it, the moment. He straightened, cleared his throat, and left with nothing more than a nod. I stayed behind, trembling, my heart broken by what almost was. The years rolled forward, carrying us both along. He climbed higher, took on dangerous cases, disappeared for days at a time. Rumors spread about gangs, corruption, powerful enemies. I watched from my small classroom, chalk dust on my hands, while he walked into battles I could never imagine. But I never stopped loving him, even when the distance grew unbearable, even when the silence between us became a canyon, even when hope felt foolish. Because love, once planted, does not ask permission to bloom. And mine had grown wild, roots tangled around my very soul. To everyone else, I was just Anna, the quiet math teacher. Reliable, predictable, the kind of woman who spent weekends grading homework and baking cookies for her students. But inside, I carried an entire universe that revolved around one man. I learned the sound of his footsteps on the pavement, the way his voice dropped when he was tired, the slight crease between his eyebrows when he was deep in thought. I loved him in ways no one would ever notice. By standing a little longer at the bus stop just to catch a glimpse of him walking by. By pretending I was running errands when really I was hoping to cross paths with him on his patrol. By memorizing the articles written about him, the cases he solved, as if his victories were mine too. He was my secret religion, my daily prayer, my impossible dream. In class, while explaining fractions to 9-year-olds, I sometimes drifted. My students never noticed when my voice softened, when my eyes flickered toward the window. In my mind, Ethan was always there, waiting outside with that half-smile of his, ready to walk me home. At night, when I lay in bed, I painted futures in the dark, dinners together, arguments about nothing, laughter in the kitchen. A life where he was mine, and I was his. I knew it wasn't real. I knew that the man who lived for justice, who wore his uniform like a second skin, didn't have space for me in his world. But still, my heart refused to obey logic. Maybe love isn't meant to be logical. Maybe it's meant to be foolish. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I was leaving school late, my arms full of test papers, when I saw him standing by his patrol car. His uniform was wrinkled, his tie loosened. But when he saw me, his tired face lit up. "Anna," he called, as though my name was a relief. I froze, my heart hammering. He walked toward me, carrying a small paper bag. "I passed by the bakery," he said, holding it out. "Thought you might like these. You always loved their apple turnovers, right?" I stared at him, speechless. He remembered. From years ago, a passing comment I had made at 16. I took the bag, my fingers brushing his. The world stopped. For one wild second, I thought this was it, the beginning of something. But then his radio crackled. A voice called his name. Duty pulled him away. "Take care, Anna," he said, with that same half-smile. And then he was gone. I clutched the bag to my chest, trembling. Apple turnovers had never tasted so sweet or so bitter. That night, I cried without knowing why. Maybe because hope had crept in where I thought it had died. Maybe because I realized that even crumbs of his attention could feed me for years. And yet a whisper haunted me. What if this is all you'll ever get? Crumbs? Moments? Almosts? I pushed it away. Love, I decided, wasn't about possession. It was about devotion. Even if it was one-sided. Even if it was silent. But deep down, something ached. A fear I couldn't name. A shadow I couldn't shake. It was raining again. He stood under the awning of the precinct, his hair damp, his uniform soaked. I had brought him coffee, an excuse really just to see him. "Always saving me," he teased softly as he took the cup. His fingers lingered on mine for a second longer than usual. And then his phone rang. He looked at the screen, his expression hardening. "Big case," he muttered, more to himself than to me. His jaw tightened. "This one's dangerous." I wanted to beg him to stay. To tell him I loved him. To say everything I had swallowed for years. But the words froze in my throat. "Be careful," was all I whispered. He gave me one last look, soft, almost tender, before walking into the storm. I never saw him again. It was a Thursday evening. I was grading papers at my kitchen table, red pen in hand, when the phone rang. The sound was ordinary. The words were not. "Officer Ethan Cole, there was an incident." My pen slipped from my hand. The voice kept talking, phrases like line of duty, investigation, unexpected, condolences. But my brain only caught fragments, like broken glass cutting into my skin. "No," I whispered. "No, you must be mistaken. Ethan can't, he can't be." The voice on the other end softened. "I'm so sorry." And just like that, my world split open. I didn't believe it. For days, I convinced myself it was a mistake. That any moment he would call. That I'd see him standing at the corner, drenched from the rain, smiling like he always did. I went to the precinct, demanding answers. His colleagues looked at me with pity I couldn't bear. "Anna," one of them said gently, "he's gone." But I shook my head. "No." He promised me. He promised he'd be careful. But promises don't stop bullets. Promises don't fight shadows in alleys where justice dies. I wore black. Everyone did. His coffin was draped in the flag. Speeches were made. Medals were pinned posthumously. Words like hero and sacrifice were thrown into the air like confetti meant to cover a wound too deep to heal. I stood in the back because I wasn't his wife, his fiancée, not even his girlfriend. I was nothing to him in the eyes of the world. Just the math teacher who loved him in silence. I watched as they lowered him into the earth, my hands trembling. And I thought, how can the ground hold someone whose spirit was bigger than the sky? I tried to return to school, to teach fractions, to smile at children who still believed the world was safe. But every equation blurred into his face. Every chalk mark on the board felt meaningless. What good were numbers when justice could be stolen in a back alley? What good was logic when life ended in chaos? One afternoon, in the middle of a lesson, I froze. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the chalk. My students stared. "I'm sorry," I whispered and walked out. I never went back. They said his death was an accident. A complication in an ongoing case. Wrong place, wrong time. But the details didn't add up. Why was he alone? Why weren't there body cameras? Why were the reports full of holes? The math teacher in me couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. The woman in love with him couldn't forgive them. Night after night, I read legal articles, police reports, cases where truth slipped through cracks of a system. My notebooks filled with questions, formulas, timelines. I was solving equations no one else cared to solve. And slowly, unbearably, I began to realize the life I had wasn't enough anymore. I handed in my resignation on a Monday morning. The principal looked at me, startled. "Anna, you're one of our best. The kids love you." But I couldn't stay in a world of chalkboards and fractions, not when Ethan's shadow haunted every number I wrote. "I can't do this anymore," I said simply. I need to do more." I walked out of that school with nothing but a box of books and a hollow heart. But I also carried a fire I hadn't felt before. For weeks, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by Ethan's case files, news clippings, and law articles printed at 3 a.m. And one night, the thought crystallized: if I can't bring him back, I'll carry his fight. I searched admissions deadlines. I looked at law school requirements. Every line I read felt impossible: essays, entrance exams, interviews. But then I remembered the way Ethan used to look at me, his voice low, steady. "You're smarter than you think, Anna. You just need to believe it." So I applied. Logic, analysis, patterns. I had lived my life teaching children how to break problems into parts, how to find clarity in confusion. And as I solved each section of the exam, I realized math had prepared me for this. When the acceptance letter arrived, I held it in my hands like it was proof that Ethan's death would not be in vain. The classroom smelled of ambition, leather bags, coffee, freshly printed casebooks. Everyone looked sharp, confident, ready to conquer. And then there was me, 30, grieving, lost. But when the professor asked the first question, "What is justice?" I raised my hand. My voice didn't shake. Justice is when the truth isn't buried, when no one can silence it. The room turned. Eyes landed on me. And for the first time since Ethan's death, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Law school was brutal. Endless reading, case studies, arguments that twisted language until meaning collapsed. But every night, when exhaustion pulled at me, I pictured Ethan's face. I remembered his dedication, the way he lived and died for something larger than himself. That vision fueled me. I wasn't just studying for myself. I was studying for him. And slowly, almost without realizing, I began to transform. Most of the students dreaded case briefs. They complained about the details, the endless precedents, the Latin phrases no one could pronounce. I didn't. I saw the law like equations. Each argument was a variable. Each precedent a formula. And when you line them up correctly, truth revealed itself like the answer at the end of a long calculation. When I turned in my first brief, the professor called it surgical. Precise. Clean. Undeniable. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not the mask I'd worn for others, but a smile born from recognition. The first time I stood in the mock courtroom, my legs shook. The opposing student smirked, already sure he'd win. He was loud, aggressive, every word dripping with confidence. But when it was my turn, I didn't shout. I didn't posture. I laid out the facts like numbers on a chalkboard, step by step. Cause, effect, consequence. When the gavel fell, the professor looked directly at me. "If you keep this up, you'll be unstoppable." For the first time since Ethan's death, I felt proud, not of who I was pretending to be, but of who I was becoming. At night, though, the ghosts returned. Ethan's file still sat on my desk, the case labeled unresolved. The whispers of corruption, the unanswered questions. Every time I won a small academic battle, I heard his voice. "Anna, the fight isn't over." I promised him in silence. "I will get there. I will find the truth." Second year, I applied for an internship at the district attorney's office. Most students waited until they felt more ready. I couldn't wait. I needed to step into the fire. The The first week, I was buried in paperwork, filing evidence, drafting memos. But soon, one of the attorneys noticed how quickly I saw inconsistencies others missed. "You've got eyes like a hawk," he said, "and a mind like a calculator. Don't lose that." That was the first time I realized I wasn't just surviving law school. I was meant for this. My first real assignment was small, a misdemeanor theft case. But when I dug into the evidence, I found something everyone else had missed. The timestamp didn't match the security footage. The defendant had been falsely accused. In court, my supervising attorney let me present the finding. The judge listened, nodded, dismissed the charges. It was small, insignificant, maybe, to others. But to me, it was proof. Proof that I could make a difference. Proof that Ethan's dream of justice, of truth, lived on through me. That night, I visited Ethan's grave. I placed my law school badge on the stone. "I'm not finished yet," I whispered. "But I will be. And when I get there, it'll be for you and for me." The wind carried the words into the night. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing his shadow. I felt like I was carrying his torch. The day I was sworn in as an attorney, I wore black. Not because it was tradition, but because it felt like armor. The courtroom was filled with fresh graduates, their families cheering, proud smiles everywhere. I sat quietly, my hands clenched around the folded oath. I thought of Ethan, how he never got to wear this robe, how his name would never be spoken in a courtroom again. When it was my turn, I stood tall. I swear to uphold the law, to defend the innocent, and to never stop searching for truth. But in my heart, I added words no one else heard. For him. For us. For me. It wasn't glamorous. A domestic violence case. The victim was scared, trembling, her voice barely rising above a whisper. The defense attorney was older, seasoned, confident he'd crush me in minutes. But I saw it, the pattern in his arguments, the places where he twisted the facts. Like solving an equation, I broke down his statements, exposed the inconsistencies, rebuilt the narrative piece by piece. When the judge ruled in favor of my client, the woman cried. She hugged me like I had saved her life. And in that moment I realized, justice wasn't just a word. It was flesh, blood, tears. But victory was short-lived. At the DA's office, there were cases that seemed untouchable. Names no one spoke. Files that disappeared overnight. And every time I brushed too close, someone warned me to back off. But I couldn't. Because the deeper I went, the more I saw threads that reminded me of Ethan's unsolved case. There were gaps. Lies. People in power protecting each other. The same system I had vowed to defend was rotting from the inside. One night, I stayed late at the office, digging through archives. My mentor, Attorney Harris, walked in. He saw the files spread across my desk, Ethan's case among them. "Anna," he said quietly, "if you go down this road, you'll lose friends. Maybe even your career. Are you sure this is the fight you want?" I looked at him, my voice steady. "This isn't just my fight. It's my life." He sighed. "Then be ready. The truth isn't gentle. And it doesn't come without a price." The next months were a storm. I handled case after case, fraud, abuse, corruption. Each one built my reputation as relentless, almost cold. But behind the precision, behind the strategy, there was always fire. Every victory pushed me closer to the core of the system, closer to the truth about Ethan. But every step forward, I could feel eyes watching me. The system doesn't like when you start asking the wrong questions. And I was asking all of them. It was nearly midnight when I found it. A single folder buried deep in the archives, mislabeled, as if someone wanted it hidden but not destroyed. Inside, reports from the night Ethan died. Witness statements, conflicting timelines, gaps in evidence. The words "inconclusive circumstances" repeated like a broken record. But there was one detail they overlooked, a surveillance tape from a nearby gas station. It had been logged but never entered into evidence. Why? Because the tape showed Ethan wasn't alone. Someone else was there. Someone from inside the department. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. No handwriting. Just 3 words. Let it go. I didn't show anyone. I didn't tell Harris, or my colleagues, or even my closest friend. But inside, my resolve burned brighter. If they wanted me silent, it meant I was finally close. Meanwhile, my legal work became heavier. I was assigned a corruption case involving a local politician. In court, I presented evidence so clear it felt undeniable. Yet the jury was swayed, the verdict twisted. He walked free. Afterward, he shook my hand and whispered, "You're talented, Miss Carter. Don't waste it chasing ghosts." My stomach turned, because the smile on his face was the same smug expression Ethan once told me he hated in men who thought they owned the world. One evening, leaving the courthouse, I noticed headlights following me. They trailed me through 3 turns, 2 stoplights. I parked in a crowded diner lot and waited. The car slowed, paused, then drove away. It wasn't paranoia. It was a message. We're watching you. And suddenly, Ethan's death didn't just feel like a tragedy anymore. It felt like a murder. Harris called me into his office late one night. He poured whiskey into 2 glasses and didn't look me in the eyes. "I knew you'd find the file eventually," he said. "Ethan was getting too close. He wasn't killed in a random accident, Anna. He was silenced." The glass slipped in my hand. My heart thundered. "By who?" I whispered. He looked at me with tired eyes. "The people you're trying to bring down now." After Harris's words, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my apartment felt like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to hide eyes. I taped over the camera on my laptop. I double-locked my door. Still, I felt exposed. But fear wasn't enough to stop me. Fear, I realized, was what kept everyone else quiet. At night, I wrote letters to Ethan. Pages and pages of everything I never told him. How I envied his courage. How I hated his absence but loved his dedication. How I wished I had been brave enough to say "I love you" when he was alive. Then I burned them in the sink. Watching the paper curl into ash felt like both punishment and release. I met Harris again in the courthouse basement. His hands trembled as he handed me a small flash drive. "This is everything I have. If you open it, you'll never sleep again. And if you use it, they'll come for you like they came for Ethan." I clenched the drive in my fist. My choice was clear. I'd rather die fighting than live pretending. 2 weeks later, my apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen. Just my desk ransacked, drawers left open. They weren't looking for money. They were looking for the drive. I realized then, I wasn't playing detective anymore. I was in the same position Ethan had been in, and if I wasn't careful, I'd share his fate. The next case I took was against a man tied to the same circle Ethan had investigated. Every step I took in court felt like walking a razor's edge. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. Threats piled up. But my math-trained mind saw what others missed: patterns in financial records, inconsistencies in testimonies, numbers that didn't add up. Piece by piece, I reconstructed the puzzle Ethan had died for. And when the verdict was finally guilty, I didn't feel triumph. I felt Ethan's presence, like a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. That night, leaving the courthouse, they came for me. 2 men, faces masked, waiting near my car. One grabbed my arm, the other hissed, "Stop digging, or you'll end up like him." I fought back, harder than I thought possible. Adrenaline made me stronger than fear. A passerby's shout startled them, and they fled. But as I stood there shaking, I knew I had crossed the point of no return. I no longer saw myself as a teacher who stumbled into law. I was a warrior, a seeker of justice. Ethan once told me, "Justice isn't about winning cases. It's about giving people hope that truth still matters." And for the first time, I finally understood. I wasn't just living for me anymore. I was living for him. For every victim silenced. For every voice ignored. I wasn't just Anna Carter. I was the echo of Ethan's fight. The flash drive sat in my drawer for weeks before I found the courage to open it. My hands shook as the screen lit up. Inside, documents, recordings, financial statements. Proof of corruption that reached higher than I had ever imagined. Judges, politicians, police chiefs. names that weren't supposed to be touched. And Ethan's last report. Half-written, unfinished, like a sentence cut short. If I don't make it, someone has to finish this. I whispered, I will. The deeper I dug, the more alone I became. Colleagues avoided me. Calls went unanswered. Even Harris warned me, you're lighting a fire you can't put out. But it was too late. Once you see the truth, you can't go back to blindness. I remembered the girl I used to be, chalk on her hands, teaching fractions to children, dreaming of a quiet life. She was gone, replaced by a woman who stared danger in the face and refused to flinch. I filed the lawsuit, a massive one, built on the evidence Ethan had gathered and the connections I'd traced. It wasn't just a case, it was a declaration of war. The courtroom was packed. Reporters whispered. Cameras clicked. I could feel their eyes, some waiting for me to fail, others praying I'd succeed. My opening statement wasn't polished. It wasn't political. It was raw. My partner died chasing this truth. If I fall too, let it be known that I didn't fall silent. Every day of trial was a battlefield. Evidence was tampered with. Threats arrived on my phone. My car tires were slashed. But every time fear crept in, I thought of Ethan. His laughter. His stubbornness. The way he always believed justice was worth the cost. And I pushed forward. The night before the verdict, I found a note slid under my door. One more step, and you won't live to hear the jury's decision. I sat on the floor, holding the paper, my chest tight. For the first time, I considered giving up. Was my life worth it? But then I remembered my students, the faces of children who once looked up to me, believing the world was fair, believing adults protected them. And I thought, if I stop now, what do I teach them? The jury filed back into the courtroom. My heart was a drum. Guilty. The word rang like a bell. The room erupted, gasps, whispers, outrage. But in that chaos, I felt peace. Because I had done it. Not just for me. For Ethan. For everyone. Victory wasn't sweet. It was heavy. I walked out of that courthouse knowing my life would never return to normal. Enemies still watched me. Friends still feared being near me. But inside, for the first time, I wasn't lost. I had found myself, not as a teacher, not just as a lawyer, but as a woman who turned pain into purpose. At home, I wrote one final letter to Ethan. You never got your promotion. You never got the recognition you deserved. But your fight lives on in me. And every case I take from now on, every life I protect, will be in your name. You didn't die for nothing. I promise. I folded the letter, placed it in his old badge case, and locked it away. People sometimes ask me why I keep going, why I risk my life. The truth is simple, because love never really dies. It just changes shape. I lost Ethan, but I found myself, and in the echo of that loss, I found my reason to live. Justice. The courthouse doors swung open with a heavy groan. Flashes of cameras burst like lightning in a summer storm. Reporters shouted her name, microphones shoved in her face. Miss Carter, how did you do it? Were you afraid? What's next? But she didn't hear them. For a moment, all sound drowned away, as if the world had gone silent. The steps of the courthouse stretched before her, wide, endless, bathed in afternoon light. Each step she took felt like walking into a new life. She clutched Ethan's badge in her palm, hidden in her pocket. The metal was warm, as though it carried his heartbeat. Her eyes lifted to the sky, wide, endless, and free. Inside her head, she heard his voice. You did it, Mia. You carried it further than I ever could. Her lips trembled into a smile. A tear slid down, catching the sunlight. The crowd roared around her, but to her, it was only a whisper. Because this wasn't about fame, or headlines, or winning. It was about him, about the promise she kept. She paused at the last step, turning slightly, her voice low, meant only for the wind. I found myself, Ethan. And I'll keep fighting. For you. For all of them. And then she stepped forward. Into the light. Into the life she was born to live. The camera lingers on her silhouette, the city towering behind her, the sound of sirens in the distance, not as a warning, but as a call. Fade to black.